Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. The War of the Pacific, South American Conflict, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, The Roots of Conflict. In the late 19th century, South America was a region of great economic and geopolitical importance. Chile, Peru, and Bolivia, in particular, were competing for control of the lucrative nitrate and guano deposits that were abundant along the Pacific coast. This competition, coupled with long-standing territorial disputes and political tensions, ultimately led to the outbreak of the War of the Pacific in 1879. To understand the roots of this conflict, we must delve into the complex history of the region. In the early 1800s, Chile and Peru had both gained independence from Spain, while Bolivia had been part of the Viceroyalty of Peru. However, the borders between these new nations were poorly defined, and disputes over territory and resources were common. In addition, each country had its own vision for how to develop its economy and exert regional influence. The discovery of rich nitrate deposits in northern Chile and southern Peru in the mid-1800s further heightened tensions. Nitrate, a key ingredient in fertilizer, was in high demand worldwide, and the countries that controlled its production could reap enormous profits. Both Chile and Peru saw themselves as the rightful owners of these resources, and Bolivia had its own stake in the matter, as it bordered the disputed area and sought to profit from the trade in nitrates. Meanwhile, political rivalries also played a role in the lead-up to war. Chilean President Aníbal Pinto, for example, saw himself as a champion of national pride and expansionism, and he viewed Peru and Bolivia as obstacles to Chile's greatness. In Peru, President Mariano Ignacio Prado sought to build up his nation's military and navy in response to Chile's growing power. And in Bolivia, President Hilarión Daza saw the potential riches of the nitrate fields as a way to strengthen his grip on power and promote national development. Against this backdrop of competition, mistrust, and ambition, a number of specific incidents further inflamed tensions. In 1873, for example, Peru and Bolivia signed a secret treaty known as the Defensive Alliance, which promised mutual protection against Chilean aggression. Chile, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with its lack of access to the nitrate fields, which were controlled by Peruvian and Bolivian companies. In 1878, Chilean authorities seized 3 Bolivian-owned nitrate mines, further escalating the situation. All of these factors came to a head in 1879, when Chilean troops invaded the port city of Antofagasta, which was controlled by Bolivia but largely inhabited by Chileans. Bolivia and Peru both declared war on Chile, and the stage was set for a bloody conflict that would last for 4 years. In conclusion, the roots of the War of the Pacific can be traced back to a complex web of historical, economic, and political factors. The struggle for control of nitrate and other resources, coupled with long-standing territorial disputes and geopolitical rivalries, ultimately led to a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for South America. Understanding these factors is essential for grasping the significance of the war and its lasting impact on the region. Chapter 2, Battles on Land and Sea. The War of the Pacific was fought on multiple fronts, with battles taking place on land and sea. Both Chilean and Allied forces employed a variety of military strategies and tactics, resulting in a series of fiercely contested engagements and shifting territorial gains and losses. One of the most significant naval battles of the war was the Battle of Iquique, which took place on May 21, 1879. The Chilean Navy, led by Admiral Patricio Lynch, engaged a smaller Peruvian fleet off the coast of Iquique. Despite being outnumbered, the Peruvians put up a valiant defense, and both sides suffered significant losses. The Peruvian flagship, the ironclad Huáscar, was eventually captured by the Chileans, but not before inflicting heavy damage on several Chilean ships. On land, the fighting was equally intense. The Chilean army, led by General Estanislao del Canto, launched a series of successful campaigns in the north, capturing the important cities of Antofagasta and Iquique. However, the tide of the war began to turn in late 1879, when the Peruvian army, led by General Juan Buendía, mounted a counteroffensive in the south. One of the key battles of this southern campaign was the Battle of Tarapaca, which took place on November 27, 1879. Buendia's forces engaged the Chilean army led by General Erasmo Escala, resulting in a decisive victory for the Peruvians. The Chileans suffered heavy losses, including many prisoners of war, and were forced to retreat northward. In 1880, the Chileans launched a major assault on the southern city of Arica, which was held by a combined force of Peruvian and Bolivian troops. The ensuing Battle of Arica was one of the bloodiest of the war, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties. The Chileans eventually emerged victorious, but not before committing a controversial act of war, the execution of several dozen Peruvian soldiers who had surrendered during the fighting. On the sea, the Battle of Angamos was another pivotal engagement. This naval battle, fought on October 8, 1879, saw the Chilean Navy capture the Peruvian ironclad Huáscar. The Chilean victory at Angamos gave them control of the seas and allowed them to launch a successful land invasion of southern Peru. Overall, the battles on land and sea during the War of the Pacific were marked by fierce fighting, high casualties, and strategic maneuvering. While the Chileans ultimately emerged victorious, the war was a brutal and costly conflict for all involved. The legacy of these battles continues to shape the military strategies and tactics used in the region today. Chapter 3: The Impact on Civilians. The War of the Pacific had a profound impact on civilians in Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. From displacement to violence to economic disruption, the effects of the war were felt by ordinary people across the region. One of the most significant impacts of the war was displacement. Many civilians were forced to flee their homes in search of safety and security. Some sought refuge in neighboring countries, while others moved to more rural areas in hopes of avoiding the worst of the conflict. This displacement led to a host of other challenges, including a shortage of food and resources, and increased risk of disease and illness. Violence was also a pervasive part of civilian life during the war. Bombings, raids, and other forms of aggression were commonplace, and many people lived in fear of their lives and those of their loved ones. Women and children were particularly vulnerable, with reports of sexual assault and other forms of violence being widespread. The economic disruption caused by the war was another significant impact on civilians. The war had major implications for trade and commerce in the region, leading to widespread unemployment and economic hardship. In addition, the destruction of infrastructure and property meant that many people lost their homes and livelihoods. Despite these challenges, civilians across the region demonstrated remarkable resilience and resourcefulness during the war. Communities banded together to provide support and aid to those in need, and many individuals took on new roles and responsibilities to keep their families and communities afloat. The impact of the war on civilians continued long after the conflict came to a close. In Chile, for example, the war led to a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization, which brought both benefits and challenges for those living in the country. In Peru and Bolivia, meanwhile, the war had major implications for national identity and the role of the state in society. Overall, the War of the Pacific had a profound impact on civilians in Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. The displacement, violence, and economic disruption caused by the conflict continue to shape the region to this day, reminding us of the human cost of war and the importance of supporting communities in times of crisis. Chapter 4: Diplomacy and Peace. After 4 years of intense fighting, the War of the Pacific finally came to a close through diplomatic means. The peace negotiations that ended the war had major implications for the region, both in terms of the territorial changes that were made and the longer-term effects on relations between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. The first significant attempt at peace came in 1880, when Argentina proposed a mediation between Chile and the Allied forces of Peru and Bolivia. However, these talks ultimately broke down, and fighting resumed. It was not until 1883 that a new round of negotiations, led by the United States, began to make progress. The Treaty of Ancon, signed on October 20, 1883, marked the formal end of the war. Under the terms of the treaty, Peru ceded the provinces of Tarapaca and Arica to Chile, while Bolivia was forced to cede its access to the Pacific Ocean. Chile also received a large indemnity payment from Peru, further cementing its dominance in the region. While the peace negotiations were successful in ending the war, they did little to address the underlying tensions and grievances that had fueled the conflict in the first place. In the years that followed, Chilean expansionism and regional rivalries continued to simmer, and disputes over borders and resources remained unresolved. The longer-term effects of the war on relations between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia were also significant. In Chile, the victory in the war helped to cement the country's position as a regional power, while Peru and Bolivia experienced a period of economic and political instability in the aftermath of their defeat. Meanwhile, the loss of access to the Pacific Ocean remains a major point of contention for Bolivia, which continues to seek a resolution to the issue. Despite these ongoing challenges, the peace negotiations that ended the War of the Pacific represented a major achievement for diplomacy in the region. By bringing together representatives from multiple nations and negotiating a settlement that was acceptable to all parties, the peace process helped to lay the groundwork for future efforts at conflict resolution and reconciliation. In conclusion, the peace negotiations that ended the War of the Pacific were a complex and multifaceted process, marked by both successes and ongoing challenges. While the treaty that ended the conflict had major implications for the territorial and political landscape of South America, its longer-term effects on regional relations and identity remain complex and contested to this day. Chapter 5: Remembering and Reckoning. The legacy of the War of the Pacific continues to be felt across South America to this day. As the years have passed, different nations and communities have remembered and commemorated the war in different ways, reflecting the ongoing debates and controversies surrounding the conflict. In Chile, for example, the war is often remembered as a symbol of national pride and a turning point in the country's history. The victories over Peru and Bolivia are celebrated as a triumph of Chilean strength and resilience, and the country's role in the war is often seen as a key part of its identity as a regional power. In Peru and Bolivia, meanwhile, the war is often remembered as a symbol of loss and betrayal. The cession of territory to Chile and the loss of access to the Pacific Ocean continue to be viewed as major injustices, and the war is often seen as a traumatic event in the country's histories. At the same time, there are ongoing debates about how to reckon with the legacy of the war in the present day. Some argue that the conflict should be remembered as a cautionary tale about the dangers of nationalist aggression and territorial disputes, while others see it as a catalyst for the growth and development of the region as a whole. There are also debates about how to address the ongoing challenges that emerged from the war, including the territorial disputes and economic imbalances that continue to shape regional politics. Efforts at conflict resolution and reconciliation have been ongoing, but progress has been slow and uneven. Despite these challenges, there are signs of hope for the future. Civil society organizations and community groups across the region have been working to promote dialogue and understanding across national and cultural boundaries, and to foster a shared sense of identity and purpose in the face of ongoing geopolitical challenges. In conclusion, the legacy of the War of the Pacific is complex and contested, reflecting the ongoing debates and struggles that continue to shape South America to this day. As we look towards the future, it is clear that there is much work to be done to address the underlying issues that fueled the conflict, and to promote a sense of shared purpose and identity across the region. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.